fabled heat, where magic meets desire. Subscribe to ignite the fantasy.
Rain hammered against the windows, each drop a frantic echo of the pulse throbbing in my throat. The scent of ozone and wet earth filled the small apartment, mingling with Kael's musk and Ryland's sandalwood cologne, a heady cocktail that made my knees weak. I could feel the humidity clinging to my skin, the air thick as if the storm itself had slipped through the cracked door and settled on the worn carpet. Kael sat across from me, his predatory stillness at odds with Ryland's restless pacing behind me. The low light from the single lamp threw his jaw into sharp relief, the shadows dancing across the scar that ran from his left temple to his chin. I watched the way his fingers twitched on the armrest, the faint flex of his knuckles a promise of something dangerous and delicious. Ryland, on the other hand, moved like a caged tiger, his boots scraping the floor in a rhythm that matched the rain's percussion. His steel-blue stare pierced through my thin blouse, and I felt his breath, warm and scented with cedar, brush the nape of my neck. I tried to steady my breathing, but the storm outside seemed to echo the storm inside me. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a drum that threatened to drown out the world. I could hear the faint hum of the city beyond the glass, distant horns and sirens muffled by the downpour, but my focus was narrowed to the two men who occupied the room like twin suns. When Kael's hand flexed on the armrest, the leather creaked ominously, a sound that cut through the rain's chatter like a blade. I felt his gaze settle on me, amber eyes burning with a primal hunger that made my skin prickle. He did not speak, but the intensity of his stare said everything. "Alex," Ryland purred, his voice low and velvety, the syllable of my name rolling off his tongue like a caress. His breath was hot on my neck as his hands settled on my shoulders, the pressure firm enough to make my breath hitch. "You've been teasing us all night." The words sent a shiver down my spine, a ripple that traveled from the base of my skull to the tips of my toes. I could feel the heat of his palms, the way his fingers dug into the fabric of my blouse, as if he were trying to imprint his presence onto my skin. Kael rose in one fluid motion, his shirt straining over muscles that rippled with barely contained power. The first tier of fabric echoed like a gunshot, a sharp snap that seemed to split the room in two. I stared, breath caught, as the torn shirt fell away, revealing a torso that was both sculpture and weapon. The light caught the faint sheen of sweat on his skin, turning his chest into a landscape of fire and shadow. I knew then this storm wouldn't end at the window. It would break inside me, between them, and I was already drowning in the flood. "You always know how to make an entrance," I managed, my voice hoarse, the words tasting like rain on cracked pavement. Ryland's smile was a slash of white against his dark lips. "We're just getting started," he whispered, his thumb tracing a lazy circle on the edge of my collarbone. The contact was electric, a spark that ignited a current running through my veins. Kael stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking until his chest brushed against my own. The heat from his body washed over me, a wave that threatened to pull me under. He lowered his voice, a rumble that seemed to vibrate the very air. "You've been playing with fire for too long, Alex. It's time you learned how to burn." My mind raced, images flashing like lightning. Our first meeting in the market, his eyes locking onto mine across a sea of stalls. The night we shared a stolen kiss under a moonlit archway, the taste of his lips still lingering on my tongue. The way Ryland's laughter had filled the tavern when he'd challenged me to a duel of wits. All those moments swirled together, a vortex pulling me toward a precipice I could not see. I felt my pulse quicken, the rhythm matching the rain's relentless drumming. My hands trembled, not from fear but from an anticipation that felt like the first drop of rain on a parched desert. I could hear the soft sigh of the apartment's old radiator, the faint creak of the floorboards as Ryland shifted his weight, the subtle rustle of Kael's leather jacket as he adjusted it. "Tell me what you want," I whispered, my voice barely louder than the rain. Ryland's eyes softened for a heartbeat, a flicker of something tender breaking through his usual bravado. "I want you to feel everything," he said, his thumb now resting lightly on the small of my back. "Every touch, every breath, every heartbeat that you try to hide." Kael's hand moved to the small of my back as well, his fingers spreading like a promise. "And I want you to surrender to the storm," he murmured, his breath hot against my ear. "Let it wash over you, let it consume you, let it make you mine." The words were a tide, pulling me deeper into a sea of desire I could no longer resist. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of rain become a drumbeat for my own heart. The scent of wet earth rose higher, mingling with the musk of Kael and the sandalwood of Ryland, creating a perfume that seemed to wrap around my very soul. When I opened my eyes again, the world had narrowed to the three of us. Ryland's hand slipped from my shoulders to the small of my waist, his fingers digging into the curve of my hips. The pressure was firm, grounding, as if he were anchoring me to the present while the storm raged outside. Kael's other hand found the hem of my blouse, his thumb brushing the fabric with a tenderness that belied his fierce exterior. He leaned in, his lips hovering just above my ear, his breath a warm whisper. "You're mine," he said, the words a vow and a command. Ryland's chuckle was low, resonant, and he pressed his body against mine, his chest pressing into my back. "And I'm yours," he replied, his voice a promise that sent a shiver down my spine. The rain intensified, a torrent that seemed to pound against the windows with a ferocity that matched the pounding in my chest. I could feel the apartment's walls trembling, the old wooden floorboards groaning under the weight of our collective desire. I let my hands rise, finding the edge of Kael's shirt, feeling the hard planes of his muscles beneath the fabric. My fingers traced the line of his ribs, the curve of his abdomen, the way his breath hitched as he watched me. The sensation was intoxicating, a blend of power and vulnerability that made my own skin tingle. Ryland's hand slipped lower, his fingers finding the small of my back, then sliding up to rest on my shoulder blade. He pressed his thumb into the spot where a knot of tension lived, and I felt it dissolve under his touch. "You're beautiful when you're scared," he whispered, his voice a low growl that sent a thrill through me. I laughed, a short, breathless sound that seemed to echo the storm outside. "I'm not scared," I said, though the tremor in my voice betrayed me. Kael's smile was a flash of white teeth, his eyes alight with something fierce. "Then let's make sure you never have to be," he said, his hand sliding down my arm, the heat of his skin searing against my own. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as the rain hammered harder, each drop a percussion that matched the rhythm of our breathing. I could feel the heat radiating from both men, a furnace that threatened to melt the very air around us. Ryland's lips brushed my ear, a soft kiss that tasted of rain and cedar. "Close your eyes," he murmured, his voice a command and a caress. I obeyed, the darkness behind my lids amplifying every sensation. When I opened them again, Kael was leaning over me, his forehead pressed against mine. The scent of his cologne, a mix of leather and earth, filled my nostrils. He whispered, "Feel the storm, Alex, let it become a part of you." I inhaled deeply, the rain's perfume filling my lungs, the sound of water cascading down the glass, a lullaby that soothed and excited me in equal measure. My heart hammered, each beat a drum that seemed to sync with the thunder outside. Ryland's hand slipped beneath my blouse, his fingers finding the soft curve of my breast, his thumb brushing over the delicate skin. He pressed a kiss to the spot, a fleeting touch that sent a wave of heat through my body. "You're mine," he breathed, his words a promise that resonated in the hollow of my chest. Kael's other hand moved to the small of my back, his fingers spreading, pulling me closer. The pressure was gentle yet firm, a reminder that he was there, that he wanted me as much as I wanted him. "Let go," he said, his voice low, reverberating through the room like a distant drum. The rain outside seemed to swell, a crescendo that mirrored the rising tide within me. I felt my own breath quicken, the air thick with the mingled scents of storm, musk, and sandalwood. My skin tingled, every nerve ending alight with anticipation. I let my hands wander, finding the curve of Ryland's jaw, the line of his cheek, the strength in his neck. I could feel the muscles flex under my fingertips, the way his breath hitched when my thumb brushed his skin. "You're both," I began, my voice trembling. "You're both everything I've ever wanted." Kael's laugh was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards. "And you're everything we've ever needed," he replied, his hand sliding down my side, his fingers finding the edge of my waistband. The storm outside roared, a symphony of wind and rain that seemed to echo the crescendo building within the apartment. I could feel the tension coiling, a spring ready to snap, and I knew that the moment of release was near. Ryland's lips found mine, a kiss that was both tender and demanding, his tongue slipping into my mouth with a confidence that made my head spin. The taste of rain on his lips, the hint of cedar, the faint metallic tang of his blood, all blended into a sensation that was intoxicating. Kael's hand slipped beneath my blouse, his fingers finding the soft flesh of my breast, his thumb brushing over my nipple, sending a jolt of pleasure through me. He whispered against my skin, "You're mine, Alex, all of you." The words were a fire, igniting a flame that spread through my veins. I could feel my pulse racing, my breath shallow, the world narrowing to the three of us in the storm that raged beyond the glass. The rain intensified, each drop a drumbeat that seemed to sync with the thudding of my heart. I could hear the distant rumble of thunder, a low growl that resonated with the primal desire building inside me. Ryland's hands moved lower, his fingers slipping under the hem of my skirt, his touch warm and firm. He pressed his body against mine, his hips aligning with mine, the heat of his skin searing into my own. "Tell me you want this," he murmured, his voice a low growl. I could only nod, my throat too dry to speak, my eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The storm outside seemed to echo my own inner turmoil, the lightning flashing across the sky, illuminating the room in brief, stark bursts. Kael's hand found the small of my back, his fingers spreading, pulling me closer. His other hand slipped under my skirt, his fingers brushing the soft skin of my thigh. He pressed a kiss to the spot, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver down my spine. "You belong to us," he whispered, his breath hot against my skin. The words were a promise, a claim, a declaration that made my heart pound louder than the rain. I could feel the heat building, a pressure that seemed to swell within me, ready to burst. Ryland's lips moved to my ear, his breath hot, his voice a low murmur. "We'll take you to places you've never imagined," he said, his words a promise of endless nights and endless pleasure. Kael's hand slipped lower, his fingers finding the edge of my panties, his thumb brushing over the delicate lace. He pressed a kiss to the spot, a soft, lingering touch that made my breath catch. "We'll make you feel alive," he whispered, his voice a blend of tenderness and command. The storm outside reached a fever pitch, the rain a torrent that seemed to wash away everything but the three of us. I could feel the world narrowing to the heat of their bodies, the scent of their colognes, the taste of rain on our skin. I let out a soft gasp, the sound swallowed by the roar of the storm. My hands moved of their own accord, exploring the planes of Kael's chest, the curve of Ryland's shoulders, the strength of their arms. I could feel the tension in my own body, a coil of desire ready to snap. "Now," Kael commanded, his voice low, his eyes blazing with a fierce intensity. "Now is the moment." Ryland's hand slipped beneath my blouse, his fingers finding the soft curve of my breast, his thumb brushing over my nipple, sending a wave of pleasure through me. He pressed a kiss to the spot, his lips warm and demanding. "Feel it," he whispered, his breath hot against my skin. The rain outside seemed to fall faster, each drop a drumbeat that matched the rhythm of our bodies. I could hear the distant rumble of thunder, a low growl that resonated with the primal desire building inside me. I surrendered, my body a vessel for the storm that raged both outside and within. The heat of their bodies pressed against mine, the scent of their colognes mingling with the rain, creating a perfume that enveloped me completely. Kael's hand slipped lower, his fingers finding the edge of my panties, his thumb brushing over the delicate lace. He pressed a kiss to the spot, a soft, lingering touch that made my breath catch. "You're mine," he whispered, his voice a blend of tenderness and command. Ryland's lips found mine again, a kiss that was both tender and demanding, his tongue slipping into my mouth with a confidence that made my head spin. The taste of rain on his lips, the hint of cedar, the faint metallic tang of his blood, all blended into a sensation that was intoxicating. The storm outside roared, a symphony of wind and rain that seemed to echo the crescendo building within the apartment. I could feel my pulse racing, my breath shallow, the world narrowing to the three of us and the storm that raged beyond the glass. When the rain finally began to ease, the thunder rolling away into the distance, we lay tangled together, the heat of our bodies still radiating, the scent of wet earth and musk lingering in the air. I rested my head on Kael's chest, feeling his heartbeat steady against my ear, while Ryland's arm wrapped around my shoulders, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my skin. "That was," I whispered, my voice hoarse, the words barely audible over the soft patter of the remaining drops. "Perfect," Kael replied, his hand resting gently on my back, his thumb stroking a slow, comforting rhythm. Ryland chuckled softly, his breath warm against my cheek. "Just the beginning," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief and promise. The storm had passed, but the flood inside me remained, a tide that would not recede. I knew then that the night had changed everything. The rain had washed away the world outside, but inside, between the walls of that small apartment, a new world had been forged, one of fire, water, and unyielding desire. As the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold, I felt a calm settle over me. The storm had broken both outside and within, and in its wake I was left with the echo of their voices, the lingering scent of rain and cologne, and the knowledge that I had finally surrendered to the flood that had been waiting for me all along.